Oh man, things just got taken to another level, guys. As if you didn't think we could have any more drama, controversy, back and forth arguing in the fishing industry. Something crazy happened yesterday, and you might not have seen it if you live 10, 20, 30 miles beneath the nearest rock, barn, whatever it may be. But one fishing organization announced yesterday that they are officially banning the use of forward-facing sonar for 2025. Crazy times, folks. It's these guys right here, the NPFL. And you know things are serious when I gotta bust out the whiteboard for a video. I'm gonna give you guys my thoughts, my opinions on what these guys did and what it's gonna mean for the sport of bass fishing, tournament bass fishing in the future. You can probably already see my thoughts, but just give it a second, watch the video, and I want you guys to comment your thoughts down below, whether it's agreeing with me, disagreeing, whatever. We're lucky to live in a country where we all can disagree and we can share our opinions without getting our hands chopped off. So let's go get canceled. Let's go through the press release quick. I'll tell you guys what exactly was said and the reasoning for the ban. And I guess the reasoning for making this video from my side, I mean, I've kind of sat in the dark, not really come out and said much about my opinions this last year since I was fishing the Elite Series. And I thought maybe since you guys are probably used to seeing and sick of seeing some of the opinions of the experts that don't actually fish and aren't on the side of this that it's actually going to affect at all, I thought maybe you would want to hear an opinion from somebody that actually does the fishing and is part of these rule changes that could take place. Now, before we get into it as well, I want to say I have friends that fish, that work for the NPFL. Huge amount of respect for them, and really a huge amount of respect for the organization on what they've accomplished since they created their organization, because it is not easy. I've talked so much about how hard it is to really break through in any part of the fishing industry, and they've done it. And so huge props to them. This is nothing to be hurtful to anyone over there or to their brand in any way at all. So in the press release by Brad Fuller, it's said that after many sleepless nights, countless hours of discussions that touched every corner of the fishing industry, we at the NPFL have come to realize several important things about live forward-facing fishing technology. First, the issue is complex and compounded by the fact that it elicits an emotional response from many. Yeah, I would say so. Second, after rational discussion decision-making, it's helpful to remove as much emotion from the process as possible. Third, there are serious policy and business ramifications associated with taking any position on this technology. We're going to talk about that very, very quickly in the video. And finally, there's no way to make every stakeholder happy where a technology policy is concerned. Absolutely correct. And so a little bit further on, it says every sport has equipment rules to protect their players and the integrity of the game. As examples, Major League Baseball does not allow aluminum bats so as to protect certain players on defense and to preserve the game's legacy. Auto racing has restrictions on engines to protect drivers and ensure competitiveness. The PGA prohibits balls that use technology to overcome shortcomings of skill. Tournament bass fishing is not different from these sports, and the need to protect the integrity and appeal of the game. Then we go down, it says basically, you know, our sport's too important, too diverse to allow technology to shrink it to a handful of methods and tackle. Robust competition requires a variety, experience, and broad skills. It must be more than an expensive video game. Starting the 2025 season, NPFL is going to prohibit the use of real-time imaging units, commonly referred to as live forward-facing sonar, during official practice and competition. Other sonar, 2D, side imaging, 360, etc., will continue to be permitted. The use of future technology will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. All right, let's dive into that and what that means exactly. So to me, when these organizations are looking at whether or not they want to ban forward-facing sonar, any technology advancement in general, there's two things that are the main interests to them. Whether the press release said so or not, and it was very well written and well thought out, and I totally agree with a lot of the points in there, these are the two main things I think the organizations are thinking about. That's a skinny. Oh God. Oh man. How are these markers already wrecked? Aussie. Number one, he's happy. Fish health and conservation. Obviously, we don't want a technology that is going to kill fish, aid in the destruction of a fish population, or harm the fish population for the future of the sport. Ray Scott was the first, if not one of the first, or if not the most major component when it came to catch and release in bass fishing tournaments. Now, what Ray Scott did actually is not very helpful at all. I'll explain that in just a second. And the second reason we got to look at when we're talking about banning any type of technology or what we want to do with it, I don't know why those look less and less like eyeballs. Maybe some eyelashes would help. Maybe they've been smoking a little bit. Anyways, you guys get it. That's eyeballs. That's viewership. And what viewership means is, all right, it means the green marker doesn't work. We're going to use blue now. Blue also doesn't want to work. Money. Eyeballs equals money. That's viewership from people watching the sport. And if it is actually hurting viewership, obviously these organizations are going to want to get rid of the technology, right? It's that simple. And if you peruse the Facebook comments or the YouTube comments or, you know, any Timmy that decides to turn on a video camera and put videos out that want to spark controversy because they know that's the easiest way to get clicks like I'm doing right now, you would sure think that every person in the world obviously knows that if people are using LiveScope in the tournament, that means it's not fun to watch the tournament, and it's definitely going to have a negative opinion on how you view the tournament. We'll get into the facts on that in just a second too, but you guys get this idea. 1, conservation. 2, is a watchable product because we need that. How much do we need that in this sport? Professional tournament bass fishing cannot exist. Everyone wants to cry about this, but they like to use other facades like conservation or a viewable product when maybe a technology comes along that's causing them to not be as competitive anymore because they didn't learn it. I digress, so let's move on. Now, whether we like it or not, I personally believe the #1 driver and what is going to determine what bass and MLF decide to do with the use or the limiting or the banning of any type of technology moving forward is going to be viewership. It's going to be the almighty dollar. That is literally what I'm saying and talked about in this past video where we brought up the board where the money's going in and the lack thereof in the fishing industry. And of course that all comes down to viewership. Viewership means ad revenue, whether that be on social media, whether that be on television, whether that be on, if you create your own platform like NPFL's broadcasting on their website. Viewership comes in different forms, but it literally is eyeballs. It's what attracts sponsors in the industry. It's what attracts sponsors outside the industry, especially bigger TV contracts or bigger social media contracts. Whether you like it or not, it's not exciting, but it's what makes the world go around. Now, one fact about viewership of these tournaments, and you can't get a damn straight answer out of BASS, out of MLF, or at least I don't think you can as a fan. I don't think you can call and be like, hey, give me your television ratings for the last 14 years of the Elite Series. I don't think they'll give that to you. But one thing that was shared in our anglers meeting is since Fox took over the coverage of the Elite Series, 2 of the top 5 most viewed all types of streaming services and viewed events were this year in the Elite Series. And that was the Lake Fork event and the Toledo Bend event. Now, many of you guys know those were the first 2 tournaments of the year. They kicked it off, and it was predominantly a forward-facing sonar, out offshore style fishing. Wasn't quite as short-sighted as you thought. There was absolutely a ton of jerk baits that mixed in with the minnows. There was jigs that played a whole bunch. There wasn't just one way to catch them, but it was very much a forward-facing sonar-dominated event. For both of those events. So those were 2 of the top 5 most viewed tournaments in the last handful of years for the Elite Series. Now, a little bit of that could be because it's the first ones of the year and people are excited about fishing. They want to see the first few events, see what happens, what shakes out. But it's hard for me to look at those numbers and say that people are not following these events anymore because they turned it on and they turned it off because it's not a viewable experience because of an angler using forward-facing sonar. Now, I'm going to hammer this home. I'm going to keep hammering it home to you guys. The viewer is going to be affected so little by this change. People are so outraged and up in arms about how terrible it is and how boring it is to watch someone use forward-facing sonar. I might be wrong here. I might be wrong. But it is not exciting to watch people fish in general, and especially live coverage. You can have the best guys in the game doing it, best guys in the game covering it, which I think Mark Zona, Tommy Sanders, Dave Mercer, Davey Height, Ronnie, all those guys, they do such an amazing job at it. I think a lot of people would definitely call them at the top of the industry. And still, I don't know how you make 32 hours of a tournament on live an exciting product to watch. Because tell me this, guys, you can look at it right here. I want you guys to tell me what's more exciting to watch. Okay, here's angler number 1. All right, you guys take mental note of that. Okay, here's angler number 2. Okay, which one was more exciting to you guys? Yeah, that's what your change is going to be most likely as a viewer. There's obviously a few specific events during the year, like Champlain, like when they go out of Clayton for the St. Lawrence River and everyone goes out to Lake Ontario, where it's going to be a lot of guys looking at their screens. It's going to be dominated by those guys fishing offshore. But that kind of proves my point once again. It doesn't matter if Ed Loughran is in 5 feet of water, 400 yards off the bank, throwing a jig, or if Trey McKinney is 200 feet off the bank and in 40 feet of water twitching a minnow. If someone's offshore fishing, it is not going to be that exciting for the viewer. One thing that, in my opinion, has made it so substantially more exciting is, as a viewer, you're not watching someone drag a Carolina rig from the back like this all day. Wind up with the advancements in technology Bass did this year. I know MLF's done it too. The on-screen displays of their forward-facing sonar, watching the fish react offshore for the viewer. How can you not say that's a more entertaining product than watching someone do the exact same thing except dragging without seeing any of that? Also not talking, whether they're looking over there or back there or there or there, or looking at their 2D or their 360, which are legal. How's that a more viewable product? And you might say, well, because then these guys are going to be up flipping, dobbing on the bank a lot more, chatterbaiting. They're going to be actually fishing like men, doing real fishing in a little bit. I promise you it's not going to be like, yeah, well, the winning fish are out there on them boulders out there on Lake Ontario, but fuck it, I'm going to go throw a chatterbait on the grass all day because I can't look at them out there. No, the best anglers in the world are going to find the spots with fish, with side imaging, with 360, and they're going to fish for them, but the viewer is not going to have the live sonar on the screen, and the viewer is most likely also not going to have as many fish catches or as big of overall weight, etc. It's not going to be slugfest. It's going to be a lot more of a grinder events. And I know people like to follow along with grinder events, but you can't tell me that it's more exciting to watch Sabine River in June than it is to watch Lake Fork in March this year. Like, you just can't. I'm sorry. You can't. It's impossible. So viewership, I don't see how it's going to change your experience. Hardly at all. Maybe a little bit, but very, very little. Let's move on to number 2, fish health and conservation. I'm just going to touch on this briefly because it keeps coming up in comments. I see people that, don't hardly fish ever have this idea that forward-facing sonar has just totally destroyed bass fishing lakes across the country, wrecked the population by people either keeping more bass now or because they are killing fish post-release mortality, where they don't fizz a fish and it dies later on, or they gut hook it, whatever it may be. Now, take into context what I'm saying here. Ray Scott is an incredible person. He's the reason I get to fish the Elite Series, and the reason a lot of these tournaments ever got created in general was because of him. So much respect for him, and we absolutely needed the catch and release format when it comes to tournament fishing. We go to Guntersville. Guntersville has probably, 15, 20 tournaments a week out there, including several giant tournaments all year round. If every single angler was keeping the fish they kept in those tournaments, the health of the fishery would not be very good for very long, and you would eventually be left with really, really, really smart ones that were about impossible to catch before much longer. That's a little bit of an extreme situation. But as I expressed in my video I made last winter about forward-facing and the studies that have been done with the impacts of forward-facing on different populations, different species of fish, there's been 0 scientific studies that show forward-facing sonar has drastically or even remotely impacted different fisheries. It's actually resulted in an increase in the size of fish in a lot of these fisheries where it's used, and fish use it for cropping other fish, where they're actually keeping species that are better for table fare. Although Ray Scott's catch and release format absolutely helped tournaments like I just talked about with the catch and release and the health of those fisheries, the culture of catch and release when as it pertains to bass fishing has actually damaged bass fisheries around the entire country. Last year when I was making the video about LiveScope, and I was really trying to look out and see if there was any scientific evidence about fisheries populations being damaged, a gentleman named Shane O'Gorman reached out to me. He's a fisheries scientist, fisheries biologist, well-renowned for pond management, lake management practices, an expert in the field. A lot of people, you already know him, you've seen his videos and stuff, and he explained this exact thing to me, that the culture that was brought down by Ray Scott of BASS of catch and release bass fishing has actually drastically negatively impacted fisheries across the country because fish need to be kept. A certain amount of fish need to die in a population. I'm not saying to go out and freaking rip gills out of every bass you catch from here on out, but there's a reason lakes with slot limits where you can keep bass from 14 to 18 inches, 14 to 20, whatever. There's a reason those are set in place, and that's so anglers that are fishing at the rate of which those game and parks have put out there for those regulations can bring those bass in and keep them. If that does not happen, fisheries get stunted, and that's happened all around the country. An increase of fish catching, I promise you, is not drastically impacting the health of the fish in your fishery. Now, I've noticed that many people have noticed, and really people that are experts with any type of new technology, whether it's forward-facing, mapping, side imaging, what it might be, is that the fish have changed. The bass have changed how they act, where they hold, the type of baits they eat, the type of presentations you need to make, the awareness of boat pressure, bait pressure. The bait, when they hit over the top of the head, they can feel that. They can feel the boat coming in closer, further and further away. This has all impacted how the fish bite and where the fish are, more than them not being there by a substantial margin. It's not that the fish are dead or got taken out or got killed by your local Mr. Bass Pro in his sparkly boat. It's that you don't know how to catch them. I'm just gonna put it like that. You gotta use different methods. They've changed. Things change. Now, one of the most popular narratives I see pushed by not only commenters that I don't think know what they're talking about, but also by elite series anglers and other professionals, generally those that have been around for a while, like to say that everything that I've learned bass fishing and all the knowledge base that I've built over the last 15, 20, 30, 40 years of bass fishing is completely a slate that's wiped clean thanks to forward-facing sonar. And now you can see that because look at all these younger guys, these rookies, that are able to just go out and dominate and win all these tournaments with forward-facing sonar. Now, first off, I know for a fact the guys that are in my rookie class, which was the youngest all-time rookie class, the average age was 24.8 years old. I brought that up quite a bit probably, but it was the youngest of all time. The guys in my class are successful because they use forward-facing sonar, but the large majority of why they're successful is because of everything else. Let me explain. If you're a young angler, like a lot of these guys are, you know, Trey was only 18 when he qualified, now he's 19, up to guys in the late 20s like John Garrett, who won an Elite Series event this year. The fish that you have learned to target over the last 10, 15 years of all of your fishing have been the most pressured fish that have completely evolved from those that I targeted, you know, 25, 30 years ago when I got into bass fishing. Things aren't as simple anymore as going down the bank and finding the most isolated bush and pitching a spinnerbait next to it and catching the biggest fish. The fish have evolved not just because of forward-facing sonar. That's a small, we're just on the tip of that right there, but they've evolved exponentially because of the improvements in graphing and 1-foot contour map chips, the improvements in the creation of side imaging, the rapid increase in high school fishing, college fishing, tournament fishing in general, and add COVID on top of that, and now we've had thousands and thousands and thousands more anglers on every major lake across the country, and it's educated the fish faster and faster. And when we hear technology, we're thinking electronics, screens. It is like, that's not even the biggest part of it. Think about how much better the hooks are now. We didn't have fluorocarbon line, you know, 25, 30 years ago. We didn't even throw braid for topwater hardly until 25 years ago. The rod technology, the specific different rod actions, the sensitivity, the everything, tungsten. I mean, everything is so much better. You have information online, YouTube, you have Bass University, you got fish tips, every type of media that Older anglers, 35, 40 and older, they didn't grow up with any of that. The learning curve is cut so much, small in part of forward-facing sonar, largely because of the time that the anglers have put in. These guys are not only successful because they are experts at everything that I just listed, very, very refined, very technical with what they're doing. They put in the time in the off season. I can promise you, the guys that did well this year from the rookie class, which was, I was, I think, last in the EQ guys at 28th place in points, they put in way more time than your average Elite Series angler did in the off season, whether that just be out fishing on the water, time on the water, or pre-practicing. And if you're one of these guys that's on the water pre-practicing or just practicing in general as much as possible for these fish that are more pressured than they ever have been, I cannot tell you how big of an advantage it is seeing what's changed and how these fish act even in the last 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. You can see a noticeable difference in the exact same bodies of water. You cannot do that if you are in a tree stand. I have nothing against hunters. I have nothing against people that want to travel in the off season and get a fishing rod out of their hand. I understand burnout, I understand getting away from it, and I'll just straight up say it. I'm a 35-year-old with 3 kids, a wife, a property. I don't have time to go out and pre-practice all these different lakes for 10, 12, 14 days. It's a disadvantage to me too, and it's an advantage to younger guys that are single, that are willing to travel, that are dedicating their lives to this. And if we're gonna talk about integrity of the sport over and over and over, it can't just mean how advanced our screen is that we're looking at. Doesn't it also have to mean that we're rewarding the guys that have put in the most amount of time? Did a podcast the other night, my buddy Captain Ron brought up a very interesting point that I'm gonna read off really quick to you. Once again, the average EQ angler in 2023, my rookie class, 24.8 years of age, 24.8. So I'm gonna list some names for you that Captain Ron brought up. David Dudley, KVD, Randy Howe, Mark Davis, Jacob Wheeler, Brandon Palaniuk, Skeet Reese, Jay Ellis, Jordan Lee, and Keith Poche. The average age of those anglers to qualify for their first Bassmaster Classic, so not just like go fish a tournament or qualify for the Elite Series or whatever league, to actually be very, very competitive at the top of the game and make the Bassmaster Classic. The average year that they made that was when they were 22 years old. 22, so almost 3 years younger than the average EQ guy. So youth and this younger age of anglers that are making a huge impact and being very successful is not that new actually at all in our sport. I think one of the biggest proponents of integrity of the sport in our sport is hard work. And those guys are putting the hardest work. So here's an argument that was cited in the press release that I hear a lot from people that are LiveScope detractors or forward-facing detractors will say, and that is that there's restrictions in all other sports. There's got to be a restriction somewhere when it comes to fishing. And I don't completely disagree with that, but I do disagree with the examples that are always given. And this example right here is one that hits close to home because I played college baseball. And that is that aluminum bats are used in Little League, they're used in high school, they're used in college, but the reason that there aren't aluminum bats used in professional baseball is because it maintains the integrity of the game and there's restrictions to make sure that the runs aren't too high. The reason that wood bats aren't allowed in professional baseball is this reason right here. Here's Timmy, the third baseman. No. He definitely would be right-handed if he was a third baseman, obviously. Just a hand, that's the glove. And next up to bat with this brand new aluminum bat is Aaron Judge. So then this ball goes like that, faster than Timmy, the third baseman that's right-handed, can see. It's sad he can't see it, it's too fast. Then Timmy, the third baseman, is dead. The reason for no aluminum bats in baseball is, like 1% to maintain the integrity of the game. And I would say about 99% because third baseman pitchers would be dead from the ball coming off the bat too fast. Same with NASCAR. You can't say that the integrity of the sport is kept intact by having restrictor plates, when in reality, yeah, you could argue that if your car could go 350 miles an hour, it's because of a more expensive engine. More expensive engine means it lends itself more to rich people that can get in the sport and poor people that can't. And all that, but really in reality it's because if they went 350 miles an hour, then 10 people would die every single NASCAR race. That is fact, guys. If we can't compare fishing as a sport, if you even want to call it a sport, when really in reality these professional fishing tournaments are more like fishing as a 1099 employee for a company, which we'll not get into right now. But if we're not going to compare fishing to baseball or the NFL or to professional hockey or to soccer or to anything else, NASCAR, if we're not able to compare those in all different other facets of how those games interact and how those games are played, you can't pick and choose when you're going to compare fishing to little nuances in the game. Because one, we're dealing with a wild animal. We're dealing with something that is out of our control 1000%. And before we get into the hunting argument where, you know, spotlighting at night is illegal, and so, you know, using LiveScope is just like spotlighting, bro, I promise you go out and you spotlight a deer that's 20 yards away and you pull your rifle out the window and shoot it in the damn head. That is not the same as seeing a smallmouth on a boulder on Lake Ontario and throwing a drop shot to it. It might have been when the technology came out, which came out to everyone at the same time. I think we forget that sometimes, that it's a level playing field and everyone has the technology on their boats, not just a few guys. But it's not that way now. The large majority of the time, the fish have changed, they've evolved, and we are just doing everything we can to keep up with them, to stay ahead of them. This idea that people have said in the Elite Series that once you got LiveScope, it's easy. We can go out and it's easy. Well, you know, yeah, it's easy to catch a bass too. It's easy to catch a walleye. But as any walleye angler that you see in a local tackle shop will give you a hard time and say, oh, what do you guys do? You do bass fishing? Bass will eat anything. That's the easiest fish. Come be a man. Come fish for walleye. And I'll be like, oh, walleye, you just catch those on accident when you're bass fishing. That's the easiest thing ever. Yeah, both of those are true, guys. The difference is it's all relative. That's why I love tournament fishing. You get to go out and you get to see who can catch the most and biggest fish that day as compared in the exact same area, same conditions, everything as someone else. Oh, I could talk about this for hours, and I have so many more points I want to share with you guys, but I don't want it to be a 45-minute video. I mean, I'm literally filming this today on Tuesday because I want to put a video out tonight, and I know it's going to get a lot of views, and I feel like someone that's actually seeing what's happening and using the technology and part of the fishing community that will be affected by this should be able to get some of the views and revenue as opposed to someone who just makes videos about something they don't really have any idea about. But my thoughts on NPFL doing this and banning forward facing is that I actually think it's a really good idea for them. They're not anywhere close to the level as far as infrastructure and money that Bass and MLF are, because there's no feeder system. It's literally a pay-to-play type event. There's no television broadcasting, which television deals aren't necessarily a great thing, and they just have substantially lower social media presence, and they do have incredible anglers fishing over there, incredible formats. They've actually made changes to some of their tournaments this year to help the anglers catch more fish, which I love. I think it's a great idea for them to make this change, to do something different, because they need a spark, they need something to be different than the other organizations. Whether I agree with it or you agree with it or not, this is an organization that couldn't have a championship one of the first years because they ran out of money. They didn't have the funding. And so this is an opportunity for them to potentially have a big box retail store that thinks that they can sell more of their other types of products, or you know, promote different types of products that are less geared towards forward-facing sonar. It gives them an opportunity to hop in as a sponsor potentially, which would obviously help them in the future of their organization, which I'm for everyone winning. We need them to be successful. And that's another argument that I keep seeing from people, is that Bass and MLF aren't going to ban it because they get too much money from the electronic sponsors, Garmin, Humminbird, and Lowrance. And what I would say to that is, good. That's a good thing. That's all we're talking about is money, and how we are so terrible with payouts, and fishing is such terrible return on investment, whether that be entry fees or payouts or travel costs, whatever. If there's financial interests that are going to allow the organization to make more money and make the organization better, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So it's interesting that people that hate forward facing keep coming back to that. And I truly don't believe that's at the detriment of the viewer, of the fan. I think that the current format of tournaments is extremely detrimental to the viewership of anyone that is not a serious fan. It's so hard for people to get into a sport that takes 32 hours of television to watch. Now, we as tournament fishermen, we know that's the best way to figure out who the best angler is. We know that the best way to figure out the angler of the year is not to have, you know, 3 one-day events within 2 weeks because it's not across the country. It's not different types of fishing and different times of the year. We know it's spread out over 8, 9, 10 plus tournaments throughout a season that are long tournaments. That's how we can decide who the best fisherman was for Angler of the Year that year. But it comes out the detriment of the viewing experience. I mean, you can't tell me that it's exciting to watch someone else fish for 8 hours. It's exciting to fish for 8 hours. It's incredible. But until the sport of tournament bass fishing realizes that if we're gonna, base things off a viewership model to grow the sport, then you absolutely cannot have a product that is what we're putting out right now. That's my opinion, and that's one comparison we can make to all these other sports that are super high dollar, have super big television contracts, super big non-endemic sponsorships, is they're putting out a much, much, much shorter product, a 2 to 3 hour product, a lot more frequently than we're doing our tournaments. So maybe we'll make a whole video about that. That's definitely how I feel. Maybe we'll even be doing some of that ourselves. We'll see in the future. So how is this going to affect me as an angler on the Elite Series or anyone at Bass or MLF? And how do I feel about my organization that I'm fishing? So, a lot of people like to watch my videos, the minnow shaking or the jerk bait or the glide baits where I use forward-facing sonar and catch big ones. They like to think that I just started fishing once, forward-facing sonar came out, when obviously that's silly. You guys can go back and watch my old videos. We used to win a ton of tournaments before the technology was ever out there. Offshore structure fishing, shallow fishing, whatever. Didn't matter. We did a lot of different types of stuff and we're very successful. Obviously, from what I've told you guys and what my positions in the past, you guys know that I do not want the technology banned. I think it's a very slippery slope. I don't personally understand, and I can't wrap my head around how this generation of guys, and it's not everyone in this generation, but the generation of 45 or to 60 plus year old guys that literally came into the sport 15 or 20 years ago at the top level and were able to be so successful because they relied on their side imaging, a lot of them. They relied on their electronics fishing offshore. They relied on their mapping and different specific tweaks they made or being dialed into that. And they were championed for scanning around an entire practice, not even making a cast with side imaging, or scanning around for 5 hours during the tournament to find an offshore ledge and then turning around and firing a cast at them. I don't understand, and I can't wrap my head around how that is championed and that is, badass, ballsy, awesome, and someone that is, throwing at a fish that you have to factor in the perfect bait, the perfect sink rate, how far you got to throw it, how far your boat's got to be from them, keeping the boat far enough back, judging their distance of where they're swimming, judging how your boat's blowing, how that is no skill involved, and how that is a lot different than if I'm in a tournament and I'm looking for fish on my side imaging and I see there's a school of fish, and so I turn the boat, I come off plane, and I turn around and look at my waypoint I just dropped and I fire out to them, I catch them. I don't see how that's different than going out and being able to see how a fish is reacting to a bait. And I know it takes less skill. So the skill argument is crazy to me. Like, I'm positive it takes more skill to throw a minnow offshore than it does to throw a spinnerbait on against a bush or throw a square bill down a bank. I'm positive of that. There's nuances involved in both. I understand that, but you can't tell me one takes skill and is fishing and the other one takes no skill and is not fishing. And the biggest thing to me that a lot of people don't want to, they want to speak out of both sides of their mouth. They want to say that it's wrecked fishing and it's made fishing so much tougher and it's wrecked populations of fishing, so let's ban it and then it'll be better. What's going to happen is you're going to have events everywhere we go on the Elite Series schedule where you're the viewer, you're not me, you're not fishing the tournament. Likely there's 99 or 101 other guys that could be watching this that probably aren't, hopefully, that are going to be fishing the tournament. The rest of you, you're going to be watching this tournament, and we're going to be fishing at heavily pressured lakes. Every lake on our schedule has a ton of tournaments at it, has a ton of fun fishermen at it, whatever. And they've all been using forward-facing sonar. They've all educated these fish the last 6 years with it, the last 15, 20 years with side imaging, with mapping. And at the top level, we are not going to be able to catch fish with the best technology available. That's another tool in our box that gives us a little bit more of an advantage over the fish that the fish are used to seeing. They're used to being pressured this way. I promise you guys that if we're not allowed the technology at the top, again, this isn't baseball. We're not seeing the same baseball coming off the pitcher's hand, the same distance from the plate. We're dealing with a wild animal here that has a brain that changes how it feels and evolves. I promise you that it's going to be a lot tougher, a lot lower weights, a lot less big fish, a lot less entertainment for the viewer if only the top level guys have it taken away. So in the next couple weeks, we're gonna hear Bass and MLF's decision on this. And well, again, you guys know my stance. I think it's a slippery slope. I think that it's really hard to say that you're gonna ban forward-facing sonar, live sonar, when flashers are live technology. Side imaging gives you a huge advantage. Mapping, getting better and better all the time, gives you a massive advantage. We drive boats 75, 80 miles an hour now. You can take a giant fiberglass boat that costs $100 and some thousand to give you an advantage to go catch these fish. But we've decided that if you can see how a fish reacts to a bait, then that's too much. We were so worried about growing the sport. We were so worried about getting young anglers involved in the sport. And we were so set on making better rods, better line, better baits, better tackle, better everything, including better electronics. And now we got them, and we want to turn time back again. There's definitely some serious issues with the sport, and I think way down on the list would be the type of technology we're using to catch the fish. That's my opinion, but it's just my opinion. Comment your opinion down below. I'd love that because it'll help this video get more views if more people comment on it. Share it. That would help a lot too, because then I'll get more views on the video because you shared it. That's my opinions on it. You can think I'm totally wrong. I'm just giving my thoughts on someone that's used the technology as much as almost anyone and is actually fishing in these tournaments that we all like to argue about and make stuff up about to get views. All right, MFers, I'm out of here. I'm gonna go edit this video, I guess, and then yeah, I'm going fishing tomorrow. All right, MFers, I'm out of here. Peace.
I'm not sorry. I can't help this love like mine.